guys, welcome back to Manning the Fort. It's Philip here, and today I tried to paint like Marco Frisoni.
Let's talk a little bit about why I'm doing this video. YouTube is filled with amazing painters that make great tutorials detailing their methods. I consider myself a pretty good painter, but nowhere near what some of these folks can do. And it can be intimidating at times to look at what amazing painters like Marco Frisoni can put out in a relatively short period of time. So I decided to document the process of trying it myself. Marco's tutorial on using chromatic black to paint his Emperor's Champion is one that I've been hesitating to try for a long time, since I don't have some of the specific materials he uses and lack a lot of the skill that he's developed. Then I realized that's probably true of most people, so maybe it's worthwhile to show what it looks like when I attempt it. So without further ado, let's get into it. One thing Marco does a lot is heavy use of Xenothel Priming. That's something I can definitely do. So I grab my Emperor's Champion, build him up, hit him with some black primer, then I get out the white ink and airbrush. Now, Marco goes pretty heavy with the Xenothel Prime, significantly more than I normally do, but I do step up the brighter values to try to match his as best I can. When it comes to the base colors, Marco says his secret to painting black is not using black. Instead, he mixes up both a cold and a warm off black using his near sorcerous knowledge of color theory. In the CMYK color wheel, mixing colors opposite each other will give you a neutral color. If you mix things with sufficient saturation, you get pretty close to black, but with some interesting hues still showing. Inks are great for this. Let's take a look at how he did it.
The game changer is that the black you obtain from these mixes is much more vibrant, interesting and full of subtle tones and differences that simple black paint doesn't have because it's meant to be only simple, boring black. That's why these are called chromatic black. When you see these mixes next to black, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between them, but when you start spreading the paint, you can immediately notice the tones hidden inside every mix.
Now, I do have a blue and an orange ink, so I start there. Once I start mixing, I fairly quickly see what he's getting at. I do get fairly close to black. My mix comes out more green than blue, though, and I do want a bluish tint to my cool black. I probably could have added more of the phthalo blue to get there, but I realized I have an ink that's already a bluish off black, Payne's Gray. I love Payne's Gray, and it's got the blue tone I want, so I decide to just use that. Now for the warm tone, Marco uses green and magenta ink. I have lots of green inks, but no magenta. I do have magenta paint though, so let's see if I can get close. I mix them together, going heavy on the magenta since my green is a super pigmented pro-acryl. I end up with a dark, desaturated purplish color. I thin it down a bunch with airbrush thinner, and I even start to apply it to the model. While the warm magenta tones are showing up, the value is a little off. That's probably due to the ingredients I'm using, so I decide to give my mix a little nudge toward the dark side with a secret ingredient that definitely isn't carbon black ink. In all seriousness, I think adding carbon black will still get me where I want, since its pigment is actually a very dark brown, so it won't mess with the warm sensation that I've started building here. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. With my only mildly cheating chromatic blacks, I follow Marco's method, focusing the warm black from below and in the shadows while spraying the Payne's Gray from my light source, which is more or less straight overhead. Things are going pretty well, though I'm noticing I need to build more thin, transparent layers than I initially expected to get close to black on the model. Where I really start to see the black show up is when the warm and cool sprays interact. Okay, Marco, you sly devil, I see what you're doing. Next, Marco mixes a little bit of his cool black with white ink and some thinner to adjust the values. He subtly makes the more highlighted areas a little bit brighter while leaving an overall black sensation. This is where I think I made a bit of a mistake. After looking at where I'm at, I feel like my Emperor's Champion is too dark, so I probably went a little heavy here. That also goes for the next step, which is pure white, thinned way down to make it very transparent. What I end up with ends up looking like a very dark blue marine as opposed to black. Maybe he's a Night Lord's Emperor's champion? The last bit with the airbrush involves masking off the armor and hitting the tabard with white ink, then some burnt umber ink. One really amazing tip here is using Silly Putty as an airbrush mask. It's cheap, reusable, and extremely pliable, and it blocks the overspray, but doesn't pull up the paint underneath it. Then it's time to establish the environmental colors on the base. Marco is using some rusty deck plating, so goes with a rusty orange. Now I'm big on urban rubble, so I go a different route. I lay down a little bit of Gilliman flesh and Militarum green contrast in kind of random spots, then hit the tile with Skeleton Horde. The concrete then gets a coat of Basilicanum gray. Now it's time to block in some of the not black colors. So Marco does some amazing stuff here with the full Chimera line and his extensive knowledge of color theory. I'm a bit more of a novice when it comes to that stuff, and I don't have the Chimera line, so I stick with colors that are already close to where I want to end up, but I can still do some mixing and adjusting to ease transitions and the like. For red, I have a progression I'm absolutely in love with: Pro-Acryl Mahogany, Burnt Red, and Bold Pyrrole Red. If you're a fan of using triads, this is about as good as it gets for red. For the off-white of the shoulders, I use Pro-Acryl Light Umber, Ivory, and Bright Ivory. The cross is Pro-Acryl Dark Neutral Gray, sticking with the general idea of not using any pure black acrylic paint. For the metallics, Marco mixes a cool silver and a green gold. This model doesn't have the symbol on his chest, so I skip the silver, but I do mix the green gold using Vallejo Metal Color Duraluminum, Burnt Umber ink, and a little Militarum green contrast. To warm up the shadows, Marco mixes up a very thin magenta wash with a tiny bit of violet. I end up forgetting this until later, but it really does help warm up the shadows on that gold. As the other colors go on, I'm feeling a little better about my armor color, but it still feels a bit bright. Now it's on to oil washes, which is an area where I feel pretty comfortable since I use oil washes in most of my projects. Marco's trick for the cloth is a thick burnt umber oil wash that gets wiped off relatively quickly and leaves a great shading effect. I also do this on the Red Crusader seal coming off of the Champion's backpack. For the black lining, the black oil wash is a lot thinner to let it flow into the recesses. It's during this step that I think I have an idea. Oil washes, when applied correctly, can give a very smooth transition, so this is a chance to deepen the shadows of my black armor. I go in pretty aggressively with this, particularly on the chest plate, and I think it actually helps a fair bit. I also carefully apply some of that black wash to the text on the sword to make it stand out. After all this, I think he's looking pretty good.
Time to come back to the wet palette to paint edge and extreme highlights and battle damages on the armor.
Right, edge highlighting. Again, Marco mixes up a lovely desaturated blue on his wet palette with a variety of values. He also adds some magenta for the warmer spots. Now, I already have a desaturated blue that I really like, this blue-gray from AK Interactive, so I start there and modulate the values. I do also make a mix with a little magenta. I do make an effort here to be more intentional than I often am with edge highlights, specifically using the warmer color to highlight areas that interact with my warmer shadows. Edge highlighting can be tedious, but I often just kind of zen out and enjoy my audiobook while doing it, so it can be relaxing. The trick is to not thin your paint too much and very lightly use the barrel of the brush to trace the lines. I used to try to use the tip of the brush, and it was inevitably a disaster. For some of the extreme highlights, Marco uses a heavy body white acrylic. This is something I've been meaning to pick up, but I haven't yet. What I do have is some Pro-Acryl Bold Titanium White, which, while it doesn't have the texture properties of heavy body, it is really bright white. I pop a little bit of that on, and I'm feeling pretty close to done. Now, Marco does go in and add some texture to the cloth, and it looks fantastic, but I decide to forego that step. To close things out, Marco applies some rusty tones through the airbrush to tie the model into the environment on the base. I've placed mine in an urban battlefield, so I go with ash gray pigment powder. This is from Secret Weapon Miniatures, as I recall. Then it's time for the black base rim, and we're basically done. At the end of the day, my Emperor's Champion is still significantly more blue than Marco's, but I do think it would still read as black from the tabletop. I've gained an appreciation for trusting the process more. I think if I'd been less heavy on the trigger with the highlighting stage early on, I'd have ended up closer to the black on Marco's piece. Still, the idea of chromatic black is something I'd been struggling with conceptually, but seeing it on the model really did help me understand it better. The moral of the story is, even if a technique looks and sounds pretty intimidating, seeing it in person can often help your understanding. To borrow from some other YouTubers, painting bravely is the best way to learn. I'm happy with the final result, but I know if I tried something similar again, I could do better.
So, apologies for the abrupt change for the direct-to-camera outro here, but after losing the footage 3 times, I decided to go with a different setup for this part. This was an experiment in a few ways. First, it was a totally new technique for me to be painting with, but it was also an experiment in how to approach a hobby video in general. I'd be very interested in y'all's feedback if this is something you found at all useful. There's a lot of other great painters out there that I could try something similar with, a mere mortal trying to copy some of our hobby idols. If this was something you found useful, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. I'm as I'm recording this, I'm creeping up on 400 subscribers, and when I get to 500, I'll be able to do things like community polls to see the sort of things that you want to see more of on the channel. For the project itself, I took away a couple of lessons. First, don't let not having the exact supplies you see in a tutorial stop you from trying it if you've got something that's pretty close. We have a tendency as miniature painters to get very formulaic and want things like recipes. I can't remember where I heard this, but someone said that miniature painting isn't like baking, where you have to have the exact right ingredients in the exact proportions or else it just doesn't work. It's a lot more like cooking, where you start with a basic framework and combination, and then you can season it to your own taste from there. The other lesson is not to be intimidated by new techniques. I ended up being pretty happy with the result that I got from this project, but if I hadn't been, there's not really anything stopping me from just spraying black primer on it and starting again. As miniature painters, I see a lot of folks nervous about ruining an expensive model, and I understand that. It's not cheap, and I've been there. The thing is, though, it's just paint. You can always try again if you don't like the result you got, but you'll never make significant improvement if you don't try seemingly difficult things. I do have some more hobby content on the way, so make sure to keep an eye on the channel for that. And if you want something to listen to while you're painting, I do have a lore playlist of some of the videos I've made. Until next time, remember, it is just paint, and thanks for watching.